Welcome to today's deep dive into cybersecurity and tech news. It's January 25th, 2025, and we've got a lot to get through. A mix of security blogs, tech journals, and even some researcher tweets to break down.
Yeah, it sounds like we've got a lot to unpack. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of trends are emerging.
Absolutely. And our mission today is to equip you with the knowledge to not just react to the news, but to anticipate and strategize around these potential threats. So let's jump right in. This first cluster of stories is all about vulnerabilities. It's a bit of a chaotic landscape out there.
Definitely seeing a lot of activity. The SonicWall SMA 1000 zero-day vulnerability is causing a stir. It's been assigned CVE 2025-23006 and has a severity score of 9.8 out of 10.
Whoa, 9.8 out of 10. That's pretty serious. And this impacts SonicWall's secure mobile access appliances. And it's already under active attack. The fact that it was discovered by Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center, I mean, that speaks volumes about its seriousness.
Yeah, when Microsoft's involved, it's a big deal. And what makes this vulnerability particularly dangerous is the possibility of remote code execution before authentication.
So what does that mean exactly?
It means attackers don't need valid login credentials to potentially compromise the system.
Wow, so they don't even need to log in.
That's the scary part.
So what can organizations do? I know there's a patch available.
Right, but applying it might be a challenge for some, especially those with complex systems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there are workarounds, like restricting access to trusted sources. But that's not always ideal in today's world.
Especially with everyone working remotely these days.
Exactly. And to add to the urgency here, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, has added this vulnerability to its Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog.
So there's a list of vulnerabilities that federal agencies are required to patch promptly.
Exactly. So it underscores the urgency of addressing this issue.
Definitely something to take seriously. All right, so moving on. We have the AMD microcode bug. Details are still under wraps, but what we know so far is concerning.
It is. Exploiting this bug requires local admin access. But the real concern is that it involves crafting malicious microcode.
Malicious microcode. So that's not something your average hacker is doing.
No, this is something you typically associate with nation-state actors.
Okay, so we're talking high-level, sophisticated attacks here?
Potentially.
And there's no patch yet, right?
Not yet. AMD estimates it'll be days before a fix is available.
So what can organizations do in the meantime?
Some experts are recommending extreme measures, like network isolation or even air-gapping critical systems.
Air-gapping?
Yeah, that means completely disconnecting them from any network.
Wow. So that's usually reserved for the most sensitive systems.
It is, due to its impact on functionality, but it shows how seriously this vulnerability is being taken.
Yeah, it's not a decision to be made lightly. And to add to the intrigue here, details of this bug were accidentally leaked by ASUS in a beta BIOS update.
Oh, wow. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Right. It's a reminder that security breaches can happen even in unexpected places.
Absolutely no one is immune.
All right, so let's move on to some vulnerabilities found in Palo Alto Networks firewalls. And this relates to boot hole, which was a vulnerability from 2020. That allowed attackers to bypass secure boot. And just as a reminder for our listeners, secure boot is a process that verifies the legitimacy of your operating system when you boot up your computer.
Right. It's kind of like a digital bouncer, making sure only the authorized software gets in.
So, are these firewalls still vulnerable to boot hole?
Well, researchers discovered that certain Palo Alto Networks firewalls haven't been patched for boot hole, despite assurances.
That's a little concerning.
Yeah, it raises some questions about the patching process.
And what exactly did these researchers find?
They demonstrated how these vulnerabilities in the UEFI, the modern replacement for BIOS, could allow an attacker with root access to bypass secure boot and execute malicious code.
So an attacker would need to already have some level of access?
Yes, root access is a significant hurdle, but it's not impossible for a determined attacker to obtain.
And I know Palo Alto Networks claims that the devices are safe if managed properly. But that's always a point of contention, isn't it? Perfect security is more of an ideal than a reality.
Right. It's all about managing risk. And knowing about these vulnerabilities, even if they're not easily exploitable, is crucial for effective risk assessment.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit. There's a critical warning concerning FortiGate devices. Following a recent data dump of FortiGate configuration data, all organizations are being urged to conduct a thorough compromise assessment. Think of it as an active security incident.
Treat it as if you've already been breached. Because you might have been.
And what exactly was in this data dump?
Sensitive information, IP addresses, plain text passwords, even email addresses.
All the things you don't want out in the open.
Exactly.
And research from Sensi shows
That over 5,000 of the 15,000 compromised FortiGate devices are still exposing their web login interfaces.
oof, so they haven't even taken the basic step of securing their login pages.
It's a stark reminder that patching and security hygiene are ongoing processes, not one-time events.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, so let's zoom out a little bit and look at some broader trends. The total fines issued under GDPR in 2024 were actually lower compared to 2023, dropping to $1.2 billion.
Interesting. Still a hefty sum, though.
Oh, absolutely. But it's interesting to see a decrease.
It is. However, the number of data breach notifications has actually increased by 8.3%.
So more breaches, but lower fines. What's the takeaway here?
I think it suggests that GDPR enforcement is maturing, moving beyond those initial headline-grabbing mega fines to a more consistent and preventative approach.
So the focus is shifting towards encouraging better data protection practices from the outset.
Exactly, rather than simply punishing companies after a breach.
That makes sense. All right, so let's dive into a topic that I always find fascinating, deception technology. It's a field that's evolving rapidly.
It is. It's one of those areas that really highlights the psychological aspect of cybersecurity.
Absolutely. So for those who aren't familiar with deception technology, can you give us a quick overview?
Sure. It's about building elaborate and realistic digital environments to trap attackers. Think fake databases, enticing files, even entire systems mimicking real-world infrastructure.
So we're not talking about the simple honeypots of the past.
No, this is next-level deception.
So it's about understanding attacker behavior
Yeah,
and creating a convincing illusion to lure them in.
exactly. And the goal is not just to detect intrusions, but to gather intelligence on the attackers, their tactics, their motivations, and ultimately, their identities.
So it's like turning the tables on the attackers.
In a way, yes.
And this information can be invaluable for strengthening your defenses.
Absolutely. It can also aid law enforcement investigations.
But there are legal risks to consider, right? I've heard concerns about accidental entrapment or inadvertently redirecting attackers to other targets.
Those are valid concerns. That's why approaching deception operations with caution and potentially consulting with specialized firms is crucial.
Definitely something to keep in mind. All right, last but not least, let's talk about CISA's Vulnrichment Program. It's an initiative focused on enhancing the value of CVE data.
And CVEs, or Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, are standardized identifiers for tracking security flaws.
Right, so they're basically a catalog of known vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And Vulnrichment aims to enrich this data with valuable context.
Because a list of vulnerabilities without context isn't very helpful.
It's not. It's like having a map with no label.
So what kind of context are we talking about?
Things like exploitability analysis, impact assessments, and even CVSS scores, which are standardized metrics for assessing vulnerability severity.
So it helps security teams prioritize based on actual risk, not just theoretical severity. That's a huge improvement.
And the best part is that this enriched data is integrated into existing CVE feeds.
So no extra work required.
Exactly. CISA has done a great job of making this information easily accessible.
It's a great example of a government agency proactively improving cybersecurity for everyone.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, I think that wraps up our vulnerability section for today.
A lot to think about.
Definitely. But hey, at least we're aware of these threats, which is the first step to mitigating them.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. All right, so when we come back, we'll be diving into some other interesting news stories. Stay tuned.
It seems even the medical field isn't immune to these cybersecurity vulnerabilities.
Oh, really? You've got my attention. What's happening?
Researchers have uncovered a range of vulnerabilities in Illumina DNA gene sequencer.
DNA sequencers. So those devices that are used in labs to analyze genetic material?
Exactly those.
That sounds like something out of a sci-fi thriller. Someone manipulating genetic data.
It's not as far-fetched as you might think. The reality is, a lot of these specialized devices, even in healthcare, rely on standard hardware and software, so they inherit the same vulnerabilities we see in everyday computers.
That makes sense.
And in this case, the Illumina DNA sequencers have outdated UEFI firmware, with flaws dating back years.
UEFI again, huh? It seems like a major target for attackers these days.
It's a fundamental component of modern computer systems, so naturally, it attracts attention from those looking for weaknesses.
And what kind of vulnerabilities are we talking about here specifically?
Well, in these sequencers, the vulnerabilities include insecure default configurations, weak password policies, and even flaws that could allow remote code execution.
So someone could theoretically gain control of a DNA sequencer. What are the implications of that?
While exploiting these vulnerabilities would require significant skill and access, the possibility is concerning.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Imagine the potential for tampering with sensitive genetic data or holding valuable research hostage.
That's a scary thought. It's a stark reminder that cybersecurity is not just an IT issue. It affects every sector, even those we traditionally haven't viewed as high risk.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility.
All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the intersection of cybersecurity and law. There's a new cybersecurity law in Turkey that has raised some concerns because it could criminalize reporting on data breaches.
That sounds problematic, to say the least.
Yeah, so talking about a hack could land you in jail. That seems counterproductive.
It does. The government claims it's intended to prevent misinformation and protect national security. But the broad language of the law could be used to suppress legitimate journalism and whistleblowing.
So a security researcher
Yeah.
who discovers a serious vulnerability in a government system. Under this law, they might hesitate to report it for fear of legal consequences.
Exactly. And the same goes for journalists, uncovering a data breach affecting millions of citizens.
This law could create a culture of silence around cybersecurity issues, which is the last thing we need.
Transparency is crucial for addressing these challenges effectively.
Absolutely. Speaking of addressing challenges, let's end on a more positive note. The Pyongyang Automotive 2025 hacking contest wrapped up recently.
Yeah, I heard about that.
It encourages ethical hackers to find vulnerabilities in various systems, promoting better security through responsible disclosure.
It's a great way to find and fix vulnerabilities before the bad guys can exploit them.
And this year they focus on automotive technology, given how connected and computerized modern vehicles are becoming. And the researchers did an impressive job. They uncovered 49 zero-day vulnerabilities, earning themselves $886,250 in prize money.
Not bad for a few days' work.
And for our listeners, zero-day vulnerabilities mean they were previously unknown and untouched, so they're a big deal.
They are. But the real prize here is the improved security that comes from discovering and patching these vulnerabilities before malicious actors can exploit them.
So these contests are a win-win for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
Except maybe the car manufacturers, who now have a lot of patching to do.
That's true. But that's the beauty of these contests. They shine a light on vulnerabilities that might have otherwise gone unnoticed, making our systems more secure in the long run.
All right, so that wraps up our news roundup for today.
A lot to digest.
There is. But as always, we appreciate you joining us for this deep dive, and we'll be back next time with more cybersecurity and tech news. We covered a lot of ground today, from those critical vulnerabilities impacting everything from firewalls to DNA sequencers to those broader trends in GDPR enforcement and that innovative world of deception technology.
It's amazing how much the cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving. It seems like every day there's a new threat to worry about.
It really does feel like a constant race to stay ahead of the bad guys.
It is. But that's why these deep dives are so important. They help us stay informed and adapt to these new threats. And hopefully think like an attacker to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Yeah.
So if you had to distill one key takeaway from today's news, what would it be?
I think it all comes back to the importance of proactive security. It's not enough to just react to vulnerabilities as they emerge. We need to anticipate them, understand that ever-changing threat landscape, and design security into our systems from the ground up.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it's something we've talked about a lot on the show. It bears repeating because it's so important. And we've discussed vulnerabilities in CPUs, firewalls, even DNA sequencers. But let's not forget about that human element.
Oh, the human element. Always the wild card.
Right. It's often the weakest link in the chain.
It is. Because even the most sophisticated security system can be compromised by a well-crafted phishing email or a careless employee.
That's so true. And it brings us to a crucial question for our listeners. Are you investing as much in your people as you are in your technology?
That's the million-dollar question.
Are you providing your teams with training, the resources, the support they need to be a strong first line of defense?
Because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is a team effort. Everyone has a role to play in protecting our digital world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that concludes our deep dive into the top cybersecurity and tech news for January 25th, 2025.
Thanks for joining us.
And as always, stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.